On March 19, 2014, an emergency call was made to the police of the city of Guamuchil, located in the state of Sinaloa in Mexico. On the other end of the line was the broken voice of a man asking for help for his daughter. Officers rushed to the house located in the Las Fuentes area. Upon arrival, they noticed that the front doors were wide open. The police went upstairs where they found the man. His younger daughter, who was no more than 10 years old, sat beside him, both inconsolably crying. The man led the police to a room where the lifeless body of a 16-year-old girl lay. She had suffered over 60 wounds. This news quickly spread, and all the residents of the city learned about what had happened. No one could understand who could have taken the life of such a young girl. Anel Baez Alvarez was born on March 17, 1998, in the city of Guamuchil, state of Sinaloa, Mexico. She was the second daughter of Aide Alvarez and Hugo Baeza. Her older brother was Omar. Later, the family was joined by little Aide. In her childhood, Anel didn't face any particular problems. Although she was initially a reserved child, over time she became self-assured, displaying all the grace and charm. She was very lively and always tried to entertain those around her. Anel's father worked as a tailor, and the family was prosperous, close-knit, and happy. However, all this happiness came to an end when Anel's mother was diagnosed with cancer in the early 2010s. The children had to mature quickly to take care of her. After a tough battle with the illness, Aide passed away in 2012. The family was devastated but did not give up, supporting each other in grief and trying to make life as comfortable as possible. The tragedy brought the sisters so close that they shared everything, experienced sadness and problems together. In turn, Anel continued to be a cheerful and friendly girl, passionate about dancing and music. Transitioning to high school, she became an ideal daughter, taking care of household chores, looking after her younger sister, and maintaining good grades. One of her favorite activities became cooking for the family, with desserts becoming her signature dishes. Anel also overcame her shyness and became one of the most popular girls in school. She even formed a musical group where she took on the role of a singer, developing a fondness for the ballad Amor Eterno. Around the same time, Anel met someone who would become her best friend, at least for a while. Her name was Arandi Elizabeth Gutierrez. They became an inseparable duo, drawing admiration from everyone around and being considered the most popular girls in school. They demonstrated their bond through social media posts. On October 14, 2012, Anel uploaded a photo with Arandi, expressing her joy about their friendship. She expressed gratitude to God for the opportunity to be close to her, and even wrote that Arandi had become not just a friend, but a sister to her. For a while, everything was wonderful, but over time, the situation changed. Despite being the same age, their personalities turned out to be completely different. Anel was a sweet girl who loved love songs and spending time with her family. Meanwhile, Arandi lived in an unstable environment and became increasingly involved in what was known as the narco culture. This urban community was also known in Mexico as buchonado. Arandi was consistently present at events featuring musicians of this kind, such as the concert of the band Calibre 50 during the closing of the carnival celebrations in Guamuchil in 2014. The girl also held a very clear political stance. On one occasion, she shared on her social media that she participated in a march in support of Joaquin Guzman Loera. On her social media page, she wrote, "March for the liberation of El Chapo. We must join this great cause." This statement was accompanied by a photo. Unlike her friend, Anel typically didn't express her ideology on social media and didn't share the views of those supported by her friend. As a result, the distance between them grew larger. In 2014, both of them entered Guamuchil High School at the Autonomous University of Sinaloa, but they hardly communicated with each other. Each created her own group of friends. Anel started hanging out with Melissa Karime Manuel and Maria Jose. All these friends led a similar lifestyle to hers, followed her everywhere, and admired her. Maria Jose, who had known her since elementary school, considered her the mother of the entire group. Anel assumed this role, always taking care of everyone. She was very polite and orderly. Despite distancing herself from Arandi, Anel never told her father or her siblings about their falling out. Around the same time, Arandi started behaving strangely on social media. On her page, she posted negative and concerning messages. For example, some posts were quite alarming, such as, pregnant 13-year-old girls, 13-year-old girls taking psychoactive substances, and my mom is upset that I killed my ex and buried him in my garden. Or lucky the living, dead she is envied. The initial posts didn't make much sense. She drew them from forums or songs. However, over time, some messages started to look like threats. On February 5, 2014, she wrote, "I'm going to bury you by the end of this year." The next post was on February 23 of the same month, where she wrote, "I may seem very calm, but in my head, I've killed you at least 3 times, and in the end, my mind is filled with new ideas every day." A few days later, Erandi wrote, "Thank God, no one hears my thoughts, and everything will definitely happen tomorrow." The messages didn't stop and became increasingly suspicious. On March 3rd, the girl posted, "Maybe not now and not tomorrow, but soon. I assure you, I won't tell her anything then, but know that I have already mentally destroyed you cruelly." The last post was dated March 16th, where she wrote, "This seriously drives me to despair." No one in her circle knew to whom these threats were directed. However, rumors started circulating in the school. Many said that Erandi was upset with Anel because they were no longer friends. Some even accused the girl of being jealous of her former friend because everyone loved her. However, Anel was unconcerned about what Erandi was posting on social media. She celebrated her birthday with a big party, wearing a beautiful pink dress, and she was the star of the evening. Everything in her life seemed perfect until her absence on March 19th raised concerns among her family. Hugo received a call from the school where his younger daughter attended, informing him that Anel hadn't come to pick her up as usual. At first, he wasn't too worried and thought that she might have overslept or was with friends after school. He immediately went to pick up his daughter. While on the way, Hugo decided to call Anel to check if everything was okay, but he didn't get an answer. However, he assumed that she was probably still sleeping. After picking up his daughter, Hugo tried to contact Anel again, but she still didn't answer. He repeatedly called her number but to no avail, and his worry deepened. Hugo headed to their home in the Las Fuentes area. Upon arriving, he noticed that the front door was wide open. Entering the main living room, father and daughter saw that some items had been moved. They thought it might have been a robbery. Following this, they shouted Anel's name and desperately searched for her throughout the house. Not only did she not respond, but they couldn't find her anywhere. Finally, Hugo reached her room. He tried to open the door, but it was locked, which raised his concern. He knocked several times, but Anel didn't respond. Hugo then broke down the door. What he saw in the room took his breath away. Anel's lifeless body lay on the floor, with numerous wounds and bloodstains around. He immediately called the police, who soon arrived at the house. Seeing the crime scene, the officers initially thought that a very strong person or a group of people had committed the crime. Although there were bloodstains in the room, they were minimal. It was evident that the assailant had tried to clean them up. Later, during the autopsy, the forensic expert determined that Anel had sustained a total of 65 stab wounds. Officers were convinced that the attack was carried out by someone who harbored strong hatred towards her. Moreover, the doors and windows were not forced open, leading detectives to believe that Anel knew the assailant and let them into the house. They even speculated that she might have arranged to meet with the person that day. However, when they checked her mobile phone, they found nothing. Anel had not invited anyone to her home. It was more likely a chance encounter. Since there were no surveillance cameras in the area, officers decided to interview neighbors. A few of them claimed to have seen a slender girl with black hair leaving the house. These statements narrowed down the pool of suspects, and the investigators were no longer looking for a man or a group of people. Following this, officers began questioning Anel's close circle. All relatives had solid alibis, asserting that the girl had no enemies, was very friendly, and they couldn't imagine anyone wishing her harm. However, detectives became interested in a post on Erandi's social media expressing shock at Anel's death. Some people expressed their condolences, but others started pointing fingers at Erandi as the murderer. They filled the post with comments, accusing her and claiming she was guilty of the crime. Erandi deleted her account, but it was already too late. Police summoned several of Anel's friends to inquire about the connection between the two girls. All of them stated that they had distanced themselves from each other, and it was evident that Erandi envied Anel because she was more popular. After the interviews, detectives visited Arandi's social media profiles and found all the threatening posts she had written a few months earlier. But that wasn't the only discovery. The day before, just a few hours after Anel's death, Arandi wrote, "I'm a fool. Oh my God, what have I done?" All through the posts lacked context, everything seemed to align. Arandi was declared the sole suspect in the crime. This information was kept confidential because officers feared she might flee before they could apprehend her. The agents patiently waited for the opportune moment. The case became so prominent that hundreds of people gathered at a well-known funeral home in Guamuchil to bid farewell to Anel. Friends, relatives, teachers, and classmates cried and embraced each other, unable to believe that such a young girl had left life. Despite the large crowd, two people stood out with their presence: Arandi and her mother. The young girl entered the venue with her head down, long black hair covering most of her face. Her attire was striking. In the hot weather, she was dressed in a hoodie with a hood and long sleeves, as if trying to conceal something. Both she and her mother approached to express condolences to Anel's family. Then they sat near the casket, where Anel's body rested. All present whispered and looked at Arandi with tense expressions, noting that she seemed very troubled. A few minutes after her arrival, officers approached her and, in hushed tones, asked her to follow them to the police station. The girl did not resist and went along with the authorities. Interrogation began at the police station. Initially, Arandi claimed she was innocent, but after a few questions, she broke down. She lifted her hoodie, revealing scratches and bruises on her arms and torso. The girl confessed that Anel inflicted these injuries on her when she tried to defend herself. In December 2013, Anel posted a photo online with Arandi, where they were captured hugging, smiling, and partially undressed. Arandi didn't like it because Anel did it without her consent. She asked her to remove the photo, but Anel ignored her. After some time, Anel finally agreed, but it was already too late. Their friendship was irreparably damaged. The situation worsened when one of Arandi's classmates informed her that he had a very compromising photo of her, and she suspected it was the same photo Anel had posted months ago. Since then, she began to contemplate how to seek revenge. Meanwhile, Arandi vented her anger on social media until she finally couldn't take it anymore on March 19, 2014. She wrote on her page, "In a world of 7 billion people, I only like 3 of them." After that, she went to Anel's house in the Las Fuentes neighborhood. Arandi showed up at the doorstep with 2 servings of ice cream and a wide smile. She said she wanted to make amends and be friends again. Anel happily agreed and let her into the house. She even suggested they go upstairs and chat in her room on the 2nd floor, just like in the old times. As soon as the girls entered the room, they started talking and eating ice cream. After a few minutes, Arandi suggested watching a movie. Then she said she was going to the bathroom and asked not to pause the movie. Instead of going to the bathroom, Arandi went downstairs to the kitchen. She grabbed a sharp knife. Arandi returned to the room, hiding the knife under her clothes. She saw that Anel was lying on the bed with her back to the door. Taking advantage of the situation, Arandi took up a knife and started attacking her. Anel tried to defend herself, scratching, pushing, and punching, but she couldn't overcome her. She lost too much blood and fell lifeless to the floor. Becoming a victim of a heinous crime, Arandi began to show impatience, knowing that she needed to act quickly as Anel's family would return home soon. Arandi used all the rags in the house, attempting to clean the blood. But there was so much that she could only wipe away a part of it. Eventually, she went to the bathroom, washed her hands, put on clothes taken from Anel's wardrobe. After that, Arandi closed the door to the room, leaving her best friend's body inside. Then she ran out of the house, leaving the front door ajar. Hearing such an account, Anel's relatives became furious. They knew that the story about the photograph was a lie. Anel was not capable of such an act. It didn't align with her character. Moreover, Anel's friends claimed they had never seen that photograph. They pointed out that since both girls were so popular, it was impossible for the photo not to have spread, and someone would have surely downloaded it. All signs pointed to envy as the true motive for the crime. However, the motive no longer mattered. Arandi was the sole suspect in the crime. She was officially charged with involuntary manslaughter. The legal proceedings were swift. 4 officers escorted Arandi to the juvenile court proceedings in the prosecutor's office specializing in cases involving minors. After a 1.5-hour hearing, Arandy was found guilty. Although it was evident that she had executed a premeditated plan and the murder was intentional, given that she was 16 years old, she was sentenced to 7 years of imprisonment. She was transferred to the Juvenile Detention Center in Culiacan, Sinaloa. Anel's family thought that justice had been served and it was all over, but they were gravely mistaken. The defense filed an appeal, arguing that the trial took place in Culiacan, which was incorrect, as the crime occurred within the jurisdiction of Los Mochis. The higher court decided to reopen the trial, this time within the appropriate jurisdiction. Despite the expedited process, the verdict was not overturned. This decision sparked widespread outrage among the public. Hundreds of Mexicans and foreigners shared images on social media with posters calling for justice for Anel. Several polls were conducted, with over 5 million users voting that Arandy's sentence was unjust. Many wanted her to receive a much longer prison term. The trial was conducted again, and the girl was once again sentenced to 7 years of imprisonment. Hugo went out to the journalists and expressed his dissatisfaction. He was glad that the sentence wasn't softened, but believed that Arandy's age shouldn't have spared her from a longer imprisonment. He hoped that she would at least serve the prescribed number of years, but that didn't happen either. On July 6, 2016, the girl's sentence was reduced to 5 years of imprisonment. It was also decided at the same hearing that, in case of good behavior, she could be released earlier. State police officers had to close the courthouse gates as dozens of journalists wanted to photograph her. This case became one of the most high-profile in the country. Hugo was not informed about this hearing, which caused him strong outrage, and from this point, everything became even worse. On Friday, September 23, 2017, another hearing was held to analyze Arandy's behavior in connection with reforms in the federal juvenile justice law. The girl was released. She served only 3.5 years out of the initial sentence. Leaving the court, Hugo was extremely dissatisfied. He was convinced that he witnessed a great injustice. The man expressed regret that legislative reform seemed to benefit criminals rather than victims. Just an hour and a half before the new year, a woman called 911, reporting that her husband had been assaulted right on their home's driveway. Afterward, she tearfully phoned her father-in-law to inform him that his son had been critically injured. The Hassel family's New Year 2018 commenced with the news of the passing of their cherished loved one, who succumbed to the wounds he had sustained. Camilla Martin was born on January 3, 1997, in Miami, Florida. A year later, her family relocated to Atlanta, Georgia, where she spent her childhood. Camilla grew up to be a very outgoing and energetic young woman, participating in track and field, performing as a cheerleader, and always being highly active. Her charisma attracted people, and she was constantly surrounded by friends. During her senior year in high school, she briefly contemplated whether to attend university or find a job. Ultimately, Camilla chose to enlist in the military, which offered numerous benefits, including free healthcare, complimentary education, and the opportunity to travel the world, along with stability. After completing her studies, Camilla joined the Army. In 2015, while stationed with a combat unit in Colorado, she met a young man named Tyrone Hassel III. He worked as a mechanical engineer and was also serving in the armed forces. From the very first moments of their interaction, the young couple realized they had a lot in common. They were both born into large families and shared a passion for sports. Attracted to each other, they decided to exchange phone numbers. This marked the beginning of their romance. Camilla and Tyrone not only spoke on the phone regularly, but also spent a great deal of time together, quickly becoming inseparable. Their whirlwind romance naturally evolved into a serious relationship. Sometime later, Camilla discovered she was pregnant. Tyrone was thrilled, especially when he learned they were expecting a boy. He made the responsible decision to ask for Camilla's hand in marriage. Tyrone's father, noticing the rapid progression of their romance, asked his son if he had carefully considered and thought everything through, given that they had only recently started dating. Confident in his feelings, Tyrone assured his father that he was truly in love with Camilla and wanted to marry her. He eagerly anticipated the opportunity to create his own little family and pass on his surname to his future son. Having received consent for marriage, the newlyweds settled into Tyrone's father's house and began preparing for the arrival of their firstborn. They lovingly set up the baby's nursery and discussed plans for the future. It was an exciting time for both of them. Unfortunately, one of the drawbacks of military service is frequent relocations. The newly married couple received orders to transfer to the state of Georgia. When they learned about this, they simply tried to make the most of their situation. And although Camilla was disappointed with the move, there was a positive aspect. She would now be closer to her family, who still resided in Georgia. The birth of their first child in early 2017 made the husband focus all his efforts on raising the baby and fully accept the situation. It was a healthy, strong baby boy whom they named Tyrone Hassel IV, or Chunk. The daily care of their son took up almost all of their free time. The marriage and birth of the child happened so quickly that the newlyweds didn't even have time to fully enjoy each other's company. Additionally, a month later, Tyrone informed Camilla that he had invited his teenage brother to live with them for a while. The reason was that the neighborhood where his family lived could not be called safe. Tyrone was worried that his younger brother would get involved with the wrong crowd and run into trouble. Staying with them in Georgia would help the teenager avoid the dangerous environment and benefit him. As an older brother, Tyrone felt responsible for him. Camilla was not at all thrilled with this idea. They had just gotten married, recently had a baby, and had no time to truly settle into their roles as husband and wife. Now there would be another person in their home, essentially a complete stranger to her. But Tyrone didn't really give her a choice. He had already made the decision, so his brother moved in, and the young wife had to adapt to his presence somehow. However, Tyrone, who had just turned 22, felt great. In his short military career, he had already been promoted to the rank of sergeant, which was a significant achievement for him. He was proud and happy that he could provide financial security for his family. Overall, things were going well, but as soon as the couple got used to their new living conditions, everything changed again. Immediately after their son's first birthday, both Camilla and Tyrone received orders to go to South Korea for military service. The teenage brother returned to his parents in Michigan. Little Chunk was left in the care of his grandparents, while Camilla and Tyrone headed to South Korea for a military operation. Despite being married, the young couple served in different locations and lived in separate barracks, so they didn't see each other as often as before. But in reality, they didn't make much effort to spend a lot of time together. However, there was one person Camilla saw regularly, another soldier named Jeremy Quellar from Chicago, Illinois. The two had met earlier, before they ended up in South Korea, but they weren't particularly close friends. Now, serving side by side, they began to develop an affinity for each other. Jeremy was a couple of years older than Camilla and was also married. When he received his deployment to South Korea, he was already in the process of getting divorced. The two fellow soldiers bonded over frequently discussing their personal lives and expressing grievances about their partners. Camilla was unhappy in her marriage and claimed that Tyrone didn't give her enough attention. She asserted that her workaholic husband spent more time on the military base than at home with her and their son. Their communication continued after work on Snapchat. Eventually, this correspondence began to take on an increasingly playful tone and smoothly evolved into flirting, which later shifted into real life. Camilla was a driver and often gave Jeremy rides for personal errands, and he, in turn, filled up her car with gas and invited her to dinner as a gesture of gratitude. The young woman was struck by the attention she received from Jeremy and started comparing him to her husband. The advantage clearly did not favor Tyrone, who was always busy with his service. Compared to her spouse, the new boyfriend appeared much more romantic and interested in spending time together and communicating. The relationship between Jeremy and Camilla developed very rapidly. Friendly trips to the gym, joint hangouts, and visits to bars after work soon turned into a full-fledged affair. Jeremy not only showered his girlfriend with exquisite compliments, but also often bought her small gifts. He said that she deserved much more than what she was getting from her husband, Tyrone. As the two grew closer to each other, they could no longer hide their affair from their fellow soldiers. Their irresistible attraction became evident not only to their colleagues, but also to people who saw them in bars and at the gym. Those around them began to whisper, knowing that Kamiya was married to Sergeant Tyrone and that Jeremy had a wife at home. Some even tried to pull Kamiya aside and warn her that her secret affair was noticeable to everyone around. However, the love-struck Kamiya was hardly concerned about the fact that this information would sooner or later reach her husband. And that's exactly what happened. Ignoring numerous warnings, she continued to flirt with her lover during training at the gym and was spotted by a close friend of Tyrone's. The man immediately understood the nature of the relationship between the two fellow soldiers and promptly told Tyrone everything. The couple had a serious conversation, where the woman categorically denied having an affair with Jeremy and promised to cease all communication with him. In reality, Kamiya did nothing of the sort. She continued to meet and communicate with Jeremy until one day, when they were together, her husband noticed that his wife was texting her lover on Snapchat. At that moment, a loud argument erupted. The man expressed all his grievances towards his wife, to which she solemnly promised never to talk to or flirt with Jeremy again. Although, in fact, she simply warned Jeremy that they should be more careful not to arouse suspicion from her husband. By that point, they had both completely disregarded Tyrone's feelings and continued their full-fledged relationship. Jeremy finally finalized his divorce and told Kamiya that he was ready to take her husband's place and become a father to her son, Chunk. He also made it clear that he was prepared to get rid of Tyrone one way or another. It was now up to her to file for divorce. Around the same time, the couple was in the process of updating their life insurance policies. Kamiya and Tyrone were each other's beneficiaries and were insured for $400,000. They would not be entitled to this money if they separated. In a conversation with her lover, the woman inquired about what Jeremy would do if he had $400,000 right now. They spent the whole day fantasizing about how they would spend the money until Kamiya directly asked if Jeremy was ready to send Tyrone to the other side so that they could have the opportunity to make their fantasies a reality. The love-struck Jeremy confessed that he was ready to do anything for his beloved woman. That's why their conversation further flowed into planning an actual crime. Jeremy, unable to contain his overflowing emotions, shared this plan with his friend. He enthusiastically talked about how the $400,000 would provide him, Kamiya, and little Chunk with a great start to their future life together. The friend, of course, did not believe that Jeremy was serious because his words about killing his mistress's husband sounded too crazy. Unfortunately, the unfaithful spouses had no doubts about their own righteousness and the luck that accompanied them. Over the next few months, Kamiya constantly complained to Jeremy about Tyrone, saying that she was very unhappy with his behavior, that her husband was driving her crazy, and that she couldn't wait to find herself in the strong arms of her beloved Jeremy. All these complaints really fueled the man's desire to save Kamiya from the terrible relationship and find a way out of the toxic situation. In addition to everything, the woman sent Jeremy photos of little Chunk and wrote that she could already imagine the boy calling Jeremy Dad. Kamiya described how they would live as one happy family and raise her son together. Having conceived of getting rid of her annoying husband, the woman deliberately portrayed the unbearable nature of the situation in messages to her lover, which allegedly caused her great emotional pain. The naive Jeremy believed Kamiya's every word and constantly assured her that it was only a matter of time. Soon everything would be over, and her life would change for the better. He promised to take care of it, and for now, he asked her to pull herself together and endure a little until the right moment came to implement their plans. As the Christmas and New Year holidays were approaching, Kamiya and Jeremy decided that it would be the perfect time to eliminate Tyrone. The Hassels intended to spend Thanksgiving in Georgia with Kamiya's family and then go to Michigan to spend Christmas with Tyrone's family. Meanwhile, Jeremy was supposed to go home to Chicago to spend his vacation with his mother, and since the lovers would be close to each other, Jeremy would be able to get to Michigan to carry out their sinister plan. Everything was supposed to look as if Tyrone had become a victim of street violence. He simply found himself in the wrong place at the wrong time. It wouldn't raise suspicions, considering the neighborhood where the Hassels lived. The city was known for its high crime rate. In October 2018, the 9-month stay in South Korea ended. All three returned to the United States for leave. Tyrone and Camilla were reunited with their beautiful boy. The woman pretended that everything was fine while secretly counting down the days until her husband's demise. Jeremy was also counting down the days until he could embrace his beloved without fear of incurring her husband's wrath. He had already purchased a couple of guns from a fellow soldier. He and Camilla communicated only through Snapchat, where the mistress continued to send photos and videos of Chunk, calling him Jeremy's son. December 17, 2018 arrived. The Hassels went to Michigan, where they planned to stay for 10 days at Tyrone's father's house. As soon as they arrived there, Camilla learned that nothing had changed. Another of her husband's relatives, this time his younger sister, was going to move into their home in Georgia. The girl planned to go with them when their vacation ended. Camilla was furious. Although Tyrone's fate was already sealed, the fact that he had once again made a decision without her threw the woman off balance. She immediately contacted Jeremy and, very upset, expressed her grievances against her husband, trying to further justify her decision to get rid of Tyrone. Camilla claimed that this was a display of extreme disrespect towards her and a lack of concern for their child's well-being. That day, Jeremy was once again convinced that his beloved was suffering and promised her that he would soon rid her of all her problems. However, the 10-day trip to Tyrone's father's house was coming to an end, and Jeremy still hadn't shown up and fulfilled his promise. Camilla began to panic, so she decided to increase the pressure on her lover, demanding the immediate implementation of their plan. To buy more time, she suggested to her husband that they stay with his family for a few more days, maybe even celebrate New Year's with them, since the grandparents saw so little of Chunk, and it would be fun for them to celebrate the holidays together. In reality, Camilla was just trying to give her lover more time to get to Michigan and carry out their plan. The unsuspecting Tyrone gladly agreed. He didn't need to be persuaded to stay with his parents a little longer. He met up with friends, had fun, and helped the family prepare for the new year. Jeremy promised Camilla that he would execute the plan within 7 days. On December 28th, he went to a supermarket to buy a GPS navigator for the dashboard. Then he sent a message to his mistress on Snapchat, reassuring her that he was already on his way. After that, he turned off his phone before leaving Chicago to avoid tracking his location. But instead of buying another mobile with an unknown number for cover, he turned his phone back on to ask Camilla for a meeting. He needed to see her before committing a crime for her sake. However, the woman refused a date, arguing that now was not the time for romance. They needed to focus on the reason he was here. She pointed out several locations to Jeremy where her husband would be over the next 4 days, hoping that her lover would be able to choose a suitable place for the murder. On the first evening when Tyrone was out with his friends at a nightclub, Jeremy followed him. He watched his rival exit the establishment, then sat across the street from the nearest gas station, observing as Tyrone filled up his car. But Jeremy lost his nerve and couldn't pull the trigger that night. About 2 days later, Jeremy mustered up the courage to take a person's life. Camilla gave him the address of Tyrone's father's house. The perpetrator positioned himself in his car on the opposite side of the street, waiting for the right moment. He saw Tyrone leave the house, but he wasn't alone. His teenage brother was walking with him. Jeremy hesitated. He contacted Camilla and explained that he couldn't shoot now because Tyrone's younger brother was with him, to which his accomplice ordered him to shoot both of them. The teenager had annoyed her when he lived with them in the house. However, for the first time, Jeremy stood firm and said he wasn't going to do it. The next attempt failed again because Tyrone was walking too quickly. Jeremy was either confused or, more likely, simply lost his nerve. There were a total of 6 unsuccessful attempts. Camilla was angry and beside herself. She wrote to her lover on Snapchat, genuinely outraged. The vacation time was relentlessly running out, and her husband was alive and well. After each fruitless attempt, Jeremy would drive back to Chicago to try again the next day to carry out the plan. After a harsh conversation with Camilla, he once more promised her that this time he would definitely keep his word. The last day of the year arrived. The Hassels had planned to have a picnic in a meadow a 5-minute walk from the house. They wanted to celebrate New Year's Eve outdoors with friends. The day before, Kemia pretended to be sick. She told her husband that she was feeling unwell and would prefer to just stay at his father's house. The wife told Tyrone that she would also leave their son at home so the adults could relax and enjoy themselves without having to watch over a small child. When everyone had left, Kemia called her lover and gave him one more chance to give her freedom. Jeremy tried once again to set up a date before going through with the deed, but was rejected once more. Kemia claimed that she was babysitting and couldn't meet up. That day, Tyrone set himself up. Around 10 p.m., he called his wife and told her that he would stop by the house for a minute to bring her some treats. The woman realized that this was the perfect time for the crime. She hastily texted Jeremy, inviting him to take a convenient position somewhere near the house. She prepared to wait, restless with excitement. After all, if her lover lost his nerve now, she and her husband would return home to Georgia, and she would have to continue playing the role of an exemplary wife. Determined, Jeremy quickly reached the desired street and parked in the driveway of a vacant house. He took the gun in his hands and hid near the Hassels' residence. Around 10:30 p.m., Tyrone's car pulled into the driveway. The man grabbed a bag of food and disappeared through the front door. Now or never, the perpetrator mentally urged himself. He had already replayed the scene in his mind several times, imagining himself confronting Kemia's husband, shooting, hitting the heart on the first attempt, and inconspicuously leaving the scene. But it all turned out to be not so easy and simple. As soon as Tyrone exited the house and headed towards the car to celebrate New Year's Eve with his parents and friends, Jeremy leaped out of the ambush and shot Tyrone at point-blank range. The bullet reached its target, and Tyrone fell to the ground. This emboldened the criminal. He approached closer and fired a few more shots, just to make sure his rival wasn't breathing. Then Jeremy swiftly ran towards the vacant house where his car was waiting. He didn't remember how he got behind the wheel. Slamming on the gas pedal, he sped away from that horrific place as quickly as possible. He raced down the highway at a wild speed all the way to Chicago, tossing the weapon out the window along the way. Meanwhile, it was Kemia's turn to play her role as a terrified wife. Screaming, she ran out into the street, portraying a shocked and crazed spouse. She hysterically cried for help, hoping to attract the attention of neighbors or passers-by. Then she ran back into the house to call 911. While the operator was asking for the address and additional information, she seemingly accidentally hung up, realizing that despite the severity of the wound, Tyrone was still alive. She then dialed her father-in-law's number and asked him to return home immediately, as his son had just been attacked and wounded. Meanwhile, the dispatcher managed to determine the location of the incident by the number and dispatched an ambulance there. The police arrived at the Hassels' house right after the paramedics. At this moment, Kemia continued to play the role of a concerned wife, and it looked quite believable. When Tyrone was being loaded into the vehicle, the woman tried with all her might to get to him. The police had to literally physically drag her away. Unfortunately, Tyrone did not survive. He died from his injuries. When his family was informed of this news, Kemia didn't miss a second of her performance as a grief-stricken widow. But as soon as she was alone with her phone, she immediately dialed Jeremy's number to confirm that he had finally done it. After receiving confirmation that the goal had been achieved, Jeremy headed to Georgia to quickly gather his belongings. In his mind, he had already reunited with Kemia, taken Tyrone's place, and was enjoying the happy moment they had worked so long to reach. Meanwhile, the Hassel family and the police worked tirelessly to determine who had orchestrated the attack on Tyrone. Detectives spoke with countless neighbors and Kemia, who all insisted they hadn't seen anything at all. The widow repeatedly told the police that she had no idea who could have targeted her husband. Investigators examined the crime scene in search of any clues that may have been left by the perpetrator. The only thing they found was a muddy footprint on the driveway. It had rained earlier that day. Then another lead emerged. An elderly couple living next door to the Hassels had seen a strange car. The vehicle had backed into the driveway of a vacant house. This building was up for sale, so it was unlikely that any potential buyers had come to view the residence at such a time, an hour and a half before New Year's. This seemed suspicious to them, which the retirees reported to the police, who questioned them. They also saw an unknown man run to this car shortly after the shots were fired, and the muddy footprint led in that direction. The initial theory was an unsuccessful robbery, but nothing had been taken from Tyrone. His keys were on the ground, his wallet in his pocket, as was his phone. So this theory was quickly ruled out. Intentional homicide most likely indicated some personal motive. But here, too, the detectives were met with disappointment. Tyrone was one of those people who had no enemies. He was a good guy, and those around him thought highly of him, so the case hit a dead end almost immediately. During the investigation, Kemia began to completely ignore Jeremy. When he started bombarding her with messages, she merely told him that she felt bad and missed her husband terribly. This was confusing. And then, the woman decided to delete the messaging app altogether. She still remained in Tyrone's father's house along with his entire family, playing the role of a grieving wife. Kemia turned 22 the day after receiving the autopsy results. Instead of celebrating, she held a candlelight vigil in honor of her late husband. She constantly posted tearful posts on social media about how much she missed her spouse, shared photos and memories, and expressed sadness that her son had been deprived of a father. Chunk's second birthday was approaching, and now Tyrone was not there to celebrate this event with his family. The military's vacation was ending, and everyone had to return to base. Everyone except Kemia, who had been granted additional days by management due to the tragedy. The woman was still staying with Tyrone's father. Her mother and sister came to support her in this difficult time. They all believed that Kemia was having a very hard time coping with the loss and couldn't come to terms with it. Tyrone's father was overly protective of her, wanting her and his grandson to be close by so he could keep an eye on them just in case. Who knows? Maybe the perpetrator had decided to wipe out the entire Hassel family. Meanwhile, Jeremy was beside himself. He had already taken a desperate step just for the sake of his beloved, and now he had completely lost contact with her. Not knowing who to turn to for advice, he told his friend in detail about what he had done, about how he had followed Tyrone but simply couldn't bring himself to pull the trigger, and then on New Year's Eve, he finally mustered up the courage to do it, and now he himself didn't know how to live on. The friend, not knowing what to do in such a situation, went to the chapel to talk to the chaplain. He confessed that he was at a loss as to what to do, to which the chaplain urged him to do the right thing and go to the police, which the friend eventually did. A few days later, on January 19, 2019, detectives received another tip, this time from a young woman, Jeremy's ex-girlfriend. She believed that Kemia and Jeremy were behind what had happened to Tyrone. When investigators got to the military base in Georgia, they personally spoke not only with Jeremy's friend and ex-girlfriend, but also with other soldiers who confirmed the overly close and inappropriate relationship between the two lovers. Detectives obtained a warrant to search Jeremy's apartment in Georgia, as well as his mother's home in Chicago. They didn't find any weapons, but they did find documents for the purchase of 2 pistols, one of which matched the caliber that had taken Tyrone's life. Re-questioning Kemia yielded results. The widow quickly realized what was happening, so she significantly downplayed her relationship with Jeremy. She said there was no close relationship between them, only a light flirtation. To back up her words, the widow even agreed to take a polygraph test, but failed miserably. When Kemia was told that her lover had been arrested and that he had already begun testifying against her, the woman became frightened and started telling what had really happened. At the same time, she portrayed Jeremy as a stalker obsessed with the idea of getting her for himself. He had come to Michigan of his own volition, following her and her husband everywhere, but eventually, already around 3 in the morning, she gave up and admitted that she and Jeremy had jointly planned the attack on her husband. Kemia was detained and charged. Detectives lied that Jeremy had been arrested. They only came for him a few days later. Unlike his mistress, he refused to speak without a lawyer present. When the Hassel family learned who was responsible for Tyrone's death, they were in shock. Most disgusting to them was the fact that Kemia had played the role of a grieving wife so well and had stayed in their home until the very end. They had taken care of her in every way and tried to support her at a time when they themselves were genuinely mourning. It took authorities 7 months to build a case against Kemia Hassel, as all communication between her and Jeremy was conducted on Snapchat, and the woman had deleted the app from her phone. Detectives were unable to recover these records. However, they did have the woman's search history, betraying her own husband. Kemia had Googled whether police could retrieve Snapchat messages after deleting an account. This was possible within a 30-day period, so the widow deliberately stopped communicating with Jeremy through the app. In addition, prosecutors had no physical evidence linking Kemia to her husband's death. Fortunately for the prosecution, she made a fatal mistake by admitting what she had done during a phone call from jail with her mother. Kemia said that she and Jeremy had planned the crime together, but most of the responsibility lay with him, as he was the one who had forced her to do it. When her mother asked why she hadn't just broken up with her husband, Kemia stated that she was afraid of disappointing her with her failed marriage. But her mother was more disappointed by what she had done. After speaking with her daughter, the woman expressed strong remorse to Tyrone's family because they had lost their son because of Kemia. Kemia and Jeremy were tried separately. The widow's lawyers insisted that the detectives had forced their client to make a confession by deceiving her that Jeremy had testified. Moreover, the interrogation lasted well past midnight when Kemia was so tired that she said too much against herself. They then questioned the reliability of the polygraph test, stating that these tests are unreliable and can give false results. However, the phone call made by Kemia to her mother destroyed the entire line of defense. The jury deliberated for a very short time before reaching a verdict, finding Kemia guilty of conspiracy to commit a crime, as well as intentional infliction of grievous bodily harm in the first degree. She was sentenced to life imprisonment without the possibility of parole. The defendant showed no remorse when her sentence was announced. Jeremy, unlike his mistress, repented and fully admitted his guilt. He couldn't hold back tears when Tyrone's loved ones spoke in court. Jeremy also admitted that he was in love and was ready to do anything for Kemia and her son that she asked him to do. Jeremy was sentenced to 65 to 90 years in prison with the possibility of parole. As he was being led out of the courtroom, he shouted to Tyrone's father that he wanted to tell him something. The man who had lost his son because of Jeremy visited him in prison once to listen. During an hour-long conversation, Jeremy told Tyrone's father the honest truth about everything, from the moment he met Kemia to the tragic end. He felt that the family deserved to know the real truth because their daughter-in-law probably hadn't told them. Kemia and Jeremy were dishonorably discharged from the armed forces after their convictions. And in 2021, Kemia tried to appeal her verdict, claiming that her lawyer was incompetent and that she was a victim of battered woman syndrome. But the court rejected her appeal. Tyrone and Kemia's son Chunk went to live with her mother. He communicates with his grandparents on his father's side mostly by video. Unfortunately, after the tragedy, the relationship between the two families became very awkward. The saddest thing about this story is that little Chunk will never know what his father was like. 23-year-old Army Sergeant Tyrone Hassel III. On Sunday, September 15, 2019, two fishermen were carrying out their daily work near the breakwaters of the Neuquén province in Argentina. On that day, they approached the Lime River. They were very calm until they saw something that left them speechless. In the water floated the remains of a young girl's body, specifically limbs and a skull. Concerned, the fishermen decided to call the authorities, who quickly arrived at the scene. Officers immediately recalled Cello Lopez, a young girl from the town of Platier, who had disappeared less than 3 days before. However, her body was unrecognizable. They couldn't be sure it was her, so the police continued to survey the area, trying to find any clues to establish the victim's identity. Not far away in the same river, they found the completely torn fabric bag, leggings, and underwear. The girl had not only been murdered, but had clearly been subjected to sexual assault. Upon discovering the clothing, The police called Laura's relatives and asked if they could recognize it. The officers were unaware that during the investigation, it would be revealed that the method of the crime was even more horrific than what they had initially discovered. Laura Lopez was born on November 11, 2000, in the city of Playa, Argentina. Her older sisters, Melissa and Damaris, who were 18 years old at the time of her birth, adored her immensely from the very first day. When Laura was only 3 years old, her mother passed away, and all 3 siblings were left in the care of their father. Although the father initially worked hard to support the family, he succumbed to alcoholism after a few years. Despite all the hardships she faced, Laura was a very sweet and affectionate child. That's why her sisters started calling her Cielo, a nickname by which everyone who knew her referred to her. Years later, the girl's father lost his job and they had to look for additional work. At the age of 18, Cielo started selling fried pastries during the day. Then, in the evening, she attended high school, and in her free time from studies, she took care of her nieces and nephews. She was very close to completing school and dreamed of finding a good job to restore financial stability to her family. Unfortunately, something happened that prevented this from occurring. On September 12, 2019, Cielo spent the entire day with Damaris, drinking her mate tea while Damaris tidied up the house. Her sister joked that, for the first time in her life, she had managed to make the tea well. It was a happy day. Later, Cielo went to school, where her classmates noticed something unusual about her. She sat not in her usual place but at the back of the class and left 20 minutes before the end of the lesson. Around 11:30 p.m., Cielo returned home and met up with a friend. They spent some time chatting, having a few drinks, and taking selfies for social media. At 3:00 a.m., they said their goodbyes, and Cielo mentioned that she was very tired and planned to go to sleep. The next day, Melissa sent her a message asking if she had been to the doctor for ear problems, but she didn't receive a response. Worried, Melissa called Damaris to find out if Cielo was with her, and that's when concern gripped Cielo's sisters. She was nowhere to be found, and her phone was turned off. As several hours passed without any sign of her, they decided to contact the police. At the police station, they were told that they needed to wait 48 hours from the last time they saw Cielo before filing a missing person report. The officers suggested that she might be with a boyfriend, as it was supposedly a common occurrence for teenagers. However, Saturday came, and Cielo showed no signs of life. It was only then that the police accepted the report and initiated a search. Unfortunately, by that time, it was already too late. On Sunday the 15th, 2 fishermen were working in the breakwater area of the Lemay River, just 15 kilometers from Cielo's home in Playa. They were completely calm until they saw something that took their breath away. Parts of a young girl's body, specifically limbs and the skull, were floating in the water. They quickly reported this to the authorities. Upon arrival, the first thing the officers noticed was the excessive brutality inflicted on the body. It was evident that the person responsible knew how to handle knives. Detectives continued to scour the area, trying to find any clues that could help identify the victim. Nearby in the same river, a completely torn fabric bag, leggings, and underwear were found. Continuing their search, they discovered 2 rings. Eventually, officers investigated the riverbed, where they found a knife with traces of blood. They soon called Cielo's family. As soon as Damaris arrived at the scene, she saw the clothing and, without a moment's hesitation, confirmed that it belonged to her sister. Downstream from where the fishermen accidentally found Laura Lopez's limbs and skull in the Lemay River, firefighters discovered the body of a young woman around 11:30 this Monday. It had already been handed over to the Forensic Expert Corps for analysis. The autopsy was conducted by Dr. Carlos Gordillo. He determined that the cause of death was a severe head injury, resulting in internal bleeding in the brain. This was caused by a blow to the back of the head, causing her to lose consciousness. Cielo was in agony for 2 to 4 hours. If she had received medical attention, she could have survived. In addition, bruises on her arms were found, indicating that she had been beaten and had struggled in an attempt to escape her assailant. The forensic expert confirmed the fears of Cielo's sisters. Intimate injuries were discovered on her body, indicating sexual assault. Furthermore, he noted that the distinctive signs of cuts on her neck, arms, and legs suggested that the perpetrator used common kitchen knives. This meant that the assailant lacked medical or anatomical knowledge, further widening the list of suspects. Detectives had no clue about who could have committed this heinous crime. Analyzing Cielo's mobile phone location, they discovered that after 3:00 a.m. on Friday, a man named Alfredo Emilio Escobar had been in contact with her. He was 28 years old and worked as a mechanic. Many years ago, he attended the same high school as Cielo and enjoyed hunting and fishing, making his ability to handle a knife plausible. The distance between his home and the girl's home was 2.5 kilometers or 20 blocks, facilitating a strong signal reception with the antennas. At 3:16, 3:22, 3:36, and 3:40 a.m. on September 13th, the girl received 4 calls from this man. By that time, the antennas determined that they were both at their respective homes. Afterward, both mobile phones were activated near the girl's house. From 4:29 a.m., Cielo's phone moved toward the city center and was at Escobar's house by 5:00 a.m. The girl uploaded a WhatsApp story with an alien emoji, and her phone was still located at the man's house. At 5:52 a.m., the girl's mobile phone stopped transmitting a signal. After that, no one heard anything from her. These records also showed that Escobar turned off his mobile phone until 11:05 p.m. the next day. During this time, the phone was detected by an antenna in China Muerta, where Cielo's remains were later found. On September 15th at 12:05 p.m., Escobar returned home. Video footage from 13 surveillance cameras, including city cameras, private homes, and stores, was also analyzed. In particular, recordings from the early morning of September 13th showed 2 individuals whose appearance resembled that of Cielo and Escobar. The timing coincided with the movement of the young girl's mobile phone. There was no doubt that Escobar was the sole suspect in this case. During the investigation, one of the agents recognized this man. He remembered that a year earlier they had encountered him on Highway 22, connecting the cities of New Ken and Plotier. The young man had crashed into a patrol car while traveling at a speed of over 80 kilometers per hour. He resisted arrest, and a case was filed against him. Escobar was very close to facing court for that incident, but now the charges were entirely different and much more serious. On September 17th at 8:30 a.m., approximately 30 meters from Escobar's house, a police patrol was on duty. They observed a Fiat Ducato minibus approaching, from which a young man resembling the suspect stepped out. Based on his build, facial features, and hairstyle, the police immediately recognized him. He entered the house and later emerged in the company of 2 adults around 60 years old. All 3 got into a car, heading towards Highway 22 without arousing suspicion. The police followed the car for some time and noticed that it stopped in a wilderness area, approximately 30 meters from a bridge connecting New Ken to Cipolletti. At that moment, Escobar and the elderly man got out of the car. The police approached to request identification. Escobar was in the company of his father and another man, and his mother was in the car. It was clear that they were attempting to leave the city. The young man did not resist the procedure but was visibly nervous. Soon, Escobar was taken to the police station, and his car was confiscated. He then underwent a medical examination. The results of the examination showed swelling on the knuckles of the fingers of his right hand, consistent with punching. Additionally, he had cuts on his finger and bruising on the palm of his right hand, sustained several days earlier on the same day Cielo died. Based on these findings, Escobar was officially charged with the rape and murder of the girl. He invoked his right to remain silent and was remanded in custody for 6 months, as there was concern that he might flee or obstruct the investigation. On September 1st, the first search warrant was executed at the house on Estrada Street, where the Escobar family lived. The property was spacious, with a construction site and 2 buildings at the rear. When officers entered the room where Escobar slept, they found fingerprints on the walls. Upon checking them with luminol, bloodstains were revealed. Officers also discovered a cloth with bloodstains during the search. They then proceeded to the structure behind the house, where the situation worsened. Among the crumpled vegetation, bloodstains were found. Blood was also visible on the gates, on the right handle of a cart, and on one end of a tool. It was evident that the blow that caused Cielo's death was inflicted precisely in this location. After discovering bloodstains at the search site, investigators took samples for comparison with the blood of the girl and Escobar. They also conducted DNA analysis of the fluid found on Cielo's body. Escobar's lawyer argued that accusations of rape should not be made until the results were obtained. However, the results were obtained relatively quickly. The Central Laboratory of the Ministry of Health compared the samples taken during the search with the genetic profiles of the victim and the accused, and all matched. Sneakers worn by Escobar at the time of arrest and a knife found at the bottom of the river were also analyzed. DNA matching Cello was found on both items. Subsequently, 3 swabs were taken from the intimate parts of the victim's body. One of them was compatible with Escobar's DNA. Thus, investigators could already assert that this individual had sexually assaulted the girl, then killed her, dismembered her, and disposed of the body. On September 21st, law enforcement authorities confirmed the information at a press conference. The prosecutor in the case, Juan Agustin Garcia, stated that he suspected Escobar of killing Cello to conceal the rape, and added that, if found guilty of this charge, he could face a life sentence. Despite this, additional evidence was still needed. Escobar did not plead guilty, but technology played a crucial role in exposing him. His mobile phone was confiscated by court order, and he had to provide the access code for examination. It was revealed that although Cello was among his contacts, he had deleted her on the night of her disappearance. He also got rid of the call history made to the victim but did not delete their social media conversations. During the investigation, it was also discovered that on September 11th, 12, and 13, the suspect accessed the social network to view photos posted by Cello. Despite all the evidence, Escobar continued to deny his guilt. However, all the evidence pointed to him being responsible for the murder. Finally, a hypothesis emerged about what happened on the night of the crime. On Thursday, September 12, 2019, Cello left school around 8 in the evening. After spending some time with a friend, she mentioned that she was tired and would go to sleep. At 3:40 in the morning, she received a message from Escobar, and they started chatting. Despite not being friends, she agreed to meet him, and they went to his house. What happened inside the house remained a mystery. However, the examination results suggest that Cello resisted any intimate contact with Escobar, and in anger, he assaulted her sexually. Then, fearing that she might report him to the police, he decided to end her life. Leading her to the backyard, he struck her head twice. Cello was still alive, and then Escobar acted brutally, hiding her body for several hours. He also turned off his phone to avoid drawing attention. Cello's body lay in the shed for almost a day, and she succumbed to the injuries. Eventually, Escobar dismembered the body with a sharp knife he kept in his kitchen. He then placed the body parts in his Fiat Ducato minibus and drove 15 kilometers to the area of the breakwaters. Upon returning to the scene, he turned his phone back on, feeling relieved and thinking that it was all over. The story of this case has become a matter of public concern for the entire city. New Cannes has expressed strong condemnation of the accused. However, the most impactful statement came from the 23-year-old younger sister of Escobar. She posted a message on her social media addressing both her brother and the victim. The publication received mixed reactions. Some expressed sympathy, while others accused her of complicity. Faced with these attacks, the girl asked not to lose focus on the main issue, Cello and her family. In turn, Melissa contacted Escobar's sister, thanked her for the message, and requested people to stop attacking the girl since she is not guilty of anything. Without further delay, the legal proceedings against the criminal commenced. The first court session took place in the Legislative Assembly of the province. The prosecutor in New Cannes accused Escobar of bearing full responsibility for his actions. The charges included the murder of the girl with the use of gender violence, as well as rape. During the same hearing, experts who participated in the analysis of the clothing found in the river along with the remains and evidence discovered in the man's house gave their testimonies. However, the most startling revelation came from Florencia, Cello's best friend. She revealed that for several months, Escobar had been sending messages to the victim, inviting her to spend time together and have a drink. But they had never met. From her perspective, she had known him for 5 years and was aware that he didn't have a very good reputation. Escobar's house had been a venue for parties every weekend for a long time. The house was filled with alcohol and psychoactive substances. Couples even engaged in intimate relationships openly. Florencia also stated that she had repeatedly advised her friend not to date Escobar, and the girl always responded that she wouldn't and that she ignored his messages. However, the defense asked why she hadn't recommended blocking Escobar's number. Florencia replied that it was her friend's decision, and she didn't want to dictate what to do with her life. While the girl was on the stand, they showed her surveillance camera footage taken on the day of Ciella's disappearance. In particular, they showed her a recording from a camera at 4 a.m., showing two people walking towards the city center. Florencia unhesitatingly admitted that it was Ciella. She said that her sneakers, jacket, and way of walking were unmistakable. The girl also identified Escobar. Escobar's impulsive behavior became evident when his friend testified against him, stating that he was a womanizer and suffered from substance abuse. In court, his former partner also took the stand. She recounted that their relationship ended on bad terms many years ago. She reported him to the police as she suspected him of breaking into her house and stealing money. When she went to ask him to return the money, he hit her friend who was with her. After reviewing the testimonies, the accused tried to justify himself. Escobar pointed to his friend, who sold him illegal substances, as the true perpetrator of the crime. That night, I was high. I admit I'm guilty of cleaning up the blood, of disposing of it. But I didn't kill her, he told local media. He claimed that he was under the influence of drugs that night, and that this person was in his house with Cielo. At some point, Escobar heard a scream coming from one of the rooms and rushed to see what had happened. Upon seeing the blood, he began to clean it up. He then helped his friend hide the body. At the end of his story, he thanked them for giving him the opportunity to tell his supposed truth. However, no evidence was found, and this statement was not corroborated. Escobar remained the only suspect. In his closing statement, the prosecutor argued that this man took advantage of the fact that they were somewhat acquainted with the victim and betrayed her trust. He planned the cruelty of his actions and the gruesome way of disposing of the body. The jury deliberation lasted only 40 minutes, and Alfredo Emilio Escobar was unanimously found guilty of the rape and murder of 18-year-old Laura Cello Lopez. The latter charge was aggravated by the fact that it was committed to conceal the assault and involved gender violence. For these reasons, he was sentenced to life imprisonment without the possibility of parole. Since then, the government of the province of Neuquén has enacted the Cello Lopez law, aimed at preventing violence against women. It mandates mandatory training on gender violence for students and teachers of all ages. Fortunately, he did not go unpunished, and a life sentence gives us peace of mind in society and the family, but it does not bring the victim back to life, said Marcelo Henriksen Velasco, the local attorney for the family.